You deviate to, particularly within the public role, you do private regarding. That means you do things at the cost of the public that, in a way that would benefit your family or close private clique or etc. for some pecuniary benefits or status gains. Sometimes people do it because they feel good, their relatives, friends, oh, he's a wonderful man, he has done this and that for me. But that particular service given to that particular person may not have been equitable, may not have been fair, may not have actually gone through a certain norm and standards that we set. So often people think it's a behavioral issue, that people just, it's a feel-good issue. But with that also comes some money, some gratification, some recognition, etc. And this kind of corruption basically you see in the form of bribery, nepotism, misappropriation. But these are behavioral. Some people just evil. They want to do it that way. Some sees it as a market exchange theory, that a bureaucrat sees public offices as an enterprise from which to extract extra legal income. Okay, fine, I'll accept a job which pays me only peanuts, but once I'm in there, I'm in control of contracts, tenders, etc., and I'll try and make my money out of that. So a lot of people, and a lot of people actually take it as sort of a legitimate stand on this, that this is my right, this is what I would like to do. And we also find, in terms of market exchange theory, many of the politicians, particularly in the third world countries, you will find they spend enormous amount of money during the election time. So they often see that as an investment. So once they get elected, obviously where would he get this investment out? From his position, from the resources that he controls, the decisions that he gave. So not only he takes his investment out, he also takes more than his investment he could make. So that's basically a market exchange theory. So all these theories basically make you think that where do I approach, where do I actually emphasize and give my focus so that you can control corruption. Then exchange of favor theory. This is very, very common. I do it for me, you do it for me. You know, this is a mateship thing. You know how I do it now, and in the future you do it for me. You owe it to be made kind of syndrome. You know, and this is very, very common even in many developed countries. You know, not only in the developing countries, in developed countries particularly, this is basically a mateship issue. So exchange of favor theory, like you do some favor, you give me some favor. I used to work under a boss. He actually, his entire career was based on exchange of favor theory, and that is how he became my boss. You know, but unfortunately we did not have much of a change, so you know, he had to retire before I did, and I retired after him without any exchange of favors. Then there is this political, economic, or public choice theory. And this is also in an economist perspective. They say the scope and extent of corruption in a country is determined by its institutional arrangements and not necessarily by the character of the civil service. That means that if you create space for corruption, there will be corruption. It's got nothing to do with individuals. If you give an opportunity, people will take that opportunity. They will do it. I remember as a student in this university in the mid-70s, when I used to stay at that time in International House. And International House has one particular day when they observe International Day. And there's a kind of a carnival, you know, there's a food stalls, drinks, and everything happens. But the previous evening, they bring all the food and stack up on the ground, all beer, drinks, everything. They just stack it up the previous night, and next day so that they can start right from the morning. So we were all sitting in my room with a few other friends from other countries and all that. And one of my colleagues, friends, he suddenly noticed stacks of beer being left there and nobody's there. I said, hey, there is a lot of beer. You just go and grab some there. I said, we can't do that. So, you know, we just leave it there, and tomorrow morning they're going to sell it. And his very interesting reaction was, well, if they can be stupid enough to leave it there, we cannot be stupid enough not to take it. So if you create a space for corruption, there will be corruption. That's what I'm saying. So they're not saying that, you know, people are basically driven by ethics or bad ethics or good ethics. People are driven by opportunities. If you create opportunities, people will take advantage of that. And the way these things translate in the public sector is that the more control government has on the economy, on decision makings, on resource distribution, more opportunities you give to the government for indulgence in corruption. So that's something that also need to keep in mind. The World Bank, of course, defines corruption as both behavioral and institutional. The misuse of public office for private gain is a very straightforward sort of lateral, synthetic definition. Misuse of public office. I mean, it doesn't tell you much, but basically it gives you that if you are a public official, you are not supposed to indulge in activities that will contribute to private gain. So that kind of gives you a sort of a scenario of what corruption would mean. And it's not that one or the other explains corruption better. I think all of these elements are important. And then so all of these basically give you a holistic idea of what corruption is as a process and also as a concept. Let us now move into see what are the different types of corruption and different forms and scale. In terms of types, well, we all know bribery is a corruption. Money transacted for a favor, premium paid for a service legitimately due to the beneficiary. We know the first one, money transacted for a favor. You won't need a favor over and above someone else, then you pay some money, pay some bribes, you get the favor. In some countries, corruption has become so endemic, even if you are legitimately entitled to get certain contract or whatever, still you have to pay. Because they call it speed money. That speeds up the decision in favor of you. So that's bribery. But also, as far as the poor people are concerned, if they want to access a legitimate service, like health, education, etc., although these are given free to them, quite often they do not get it free. They still have to pay some money to the local doctor, to the local teacher, or the local headman or whatever to gain access to those things. So, excuse me. So there can be bribery in the form of extracting favor, which is I'm not entitled to. There can also be bribery to extract favor, which is basically a legitimate claim of mine. But if I don't pay, decisions will not be speeded up, which will not be given in my favor. For the poor people, because they're illiterate, they're powerless, voiceless, the only way sometimes they can access resources, access benefits, services, is by paying some premium. So basically it's an assault on poverty also, as far as the bribery part is concerned. Nepotism, and this is very, very common. There may not be any money transacted, but what happens that I give a job to a friend, to relative, to friends, to clans, especially in countries where the tribalism is a huge culture. There you might find that the people in power tend to benefit and offer favors more to their own clan or own people. In my country, back home in Bangladesh, where I found that people often try to favor over others people who belong to my own district, not the other district. So that's very common. It happens. But that's also corruption. That's exactly what we have to keep in mind. That it's just not that corruption is when you transact money. Corruption is also involves nepotism, favoritism, etc. Fraud. Cheating the government, the beneficiary through deceit. And that's very, very common. From the example, the video that we show, and that's a clear case of fraud, in the sense that here was a poverty alleviation program in India, where the poor were supposed to have been paid certain amount of money against their work they would be doing, infrastructure work. But because the poor people didn't know how to read and write and all that, they also did not know how much money was allocated per person. So all these officials basically hid that information and paid them, and sometimes did not even pay them, much less than what they due to them. So that's fraud. So there's no bribery involved, but it's fraud. And also embezzlement is quite common, stealing money or other government property, and that happens in many countries. Sometimes I know people where ministers have written off government properties, land, etc., either for themselves or for their wives or children or whatever. And that happens because there is no accountability. Often we don't know, and people don't know what belongs to whom. So being in a position of power, people can indulge in this kind of thing. I often receive these emails from various parts of the world offering me millions of dollars, saying that my cousin or my father or my wife, has stashed away millions. He used to work for a oil company, now has stashed away all this money. All I need is a bank account, and I'll give you, $25 million or whatever, because I have $100 million. I have not responded to them favorably because my expectation from life is quite modest, so I really don't want those millions to upgrade my lifestyle. But the embezzlement of government property is very, very common in many parts of the world. Government money, government resources, quite common. Forms. When you again talk about corruption, you have to understand what form they take. One form is administrative corruption, corruption that distorts, manipulates implementation of policies. I just give you the example from India, like where the government actually has a program where the beneficiaries were supposed to be paid a certain amount of money. But what you did, you manipulated the situation and paid much less, and in some cases you don't even pay. So that's the distortion of the government policy. Sometimes what happens, government sets standards for, say, for example, real estate development and all that. And that standard is not imposed in 100%, because then you transact money and all that. So that's one thing. So administrative corruption basically is confined within the bureaucracy and confined and takes place and operates in a way within the framework of policies which already exist. You have a policy, they basically manipulate it or distort it to offer favor in exchange of money or other things, or delivery of services or whatever. In terms of delivery of services, the other day in a presentation I also told you how in Bangladesh government took up a project of rural health clinic. Actually the plan was to establish rural health clinic throughout the country. And the decision was that these clinics should be built in the middle of the villages so that the poor people can come from all over the village and get some benefit from it. But when it came to implementation, the local implementation officer, in conjunction with the local leader, basically located those centers, health centers, in front of the house of the local leader and not in the middle. So basically the local leader exerted complete control over the services that are given from those centers. And that happens quite often. So these are the kind of what we call administrative corruption. Then you have political corruption, and this is becoming quite serious in many countries. And these kind of corruptions happen where government policies are manipulated by corporations, by other kinds of lobby groups, etc. And this is very, very common in many of the developed countries. Recently we lost a prime minister. It was some attempt to manipulate, but did not succeed. And then you can see that major compromises have been made to accommodate the aspirations of certain groups in certain policies. And this is a serious issue, and this is where often citizens and people feel extremely helpless, where lobby groups, powerful countries, donors manipulate your policy to benefit them rather than the government or the people. So the political institutionalized corruption is also very, very interesting looking at it. The other form of institutional corruption is you would not even see it as a corruption. For example, in Indonesia, the army controls the entire logging contract in the country. So if in that country, if you are trying to implement any afforestation policy, forget it. Because that will immediately hurt interest of the army. They will never do that, allow you to do that. In Bangladesh lately, in recent years, army has been given permission to operate banks. And because they are an army institution, so they also pose themselves as a government institution without government accountability, but they also receive a lot of concessions like tax-free status and all that. So they basically are distorting the market for the other bankers. And because their cost is much lower in operation. The other danger that you have, when you have such a powerful institution operating in the market, and you want to bring about some kind of reforms and policies to standardize, improve, etc., and if that happens to affect their interests, you will not be able to do it. Because the army is a very strong institution. And no politicians will ever dare to take on them. So these are the institutionalized form of corruption. We don't see it in the open.